I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted, but in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist, but they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning, but I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. Oh, Internet, you're perfect. Oh, damn it. Nope. No. Don't you settle yourself in that seat. I got on Quora today, and I found out that you can get people to stop inviting themselves over to have me read books to them if they have to call first. It's about making it inconvenient. So you got to go back home, and you got to call me and ask if it's okay to come over. And I'll say no, and then you'll just stay home. And then I can sit around and watch Vanderpump Rules as much as I want. Go on, get. The internet does it again, and now I can sit. What? How? How so fast? Ahoy, hoy. I suppose. You went through the hoops. I can't say no at this point. Damn it! I'm gonna have to figure out something. All right, fine, come over, and we can finish Chapter 8 of The Great Gatsby. Christ, that was fast. Well, welcome to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week, I'm going to continue reading The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, a book that a friend of mine, Backwop, asked that I read roughly, 2 years ago, and you can find him at versimilitudo.us, which is a website I will link in the notes. About the author? Sure. F. Scott Fitzgerald was born September 24th, 1896, and died December 21st, 1940. He was an American novelist, essayist, and short story writer. He's best known for his novels depicting the flamboyance and excess of the Jazz Age, a term that he popularized in his short story collection, Tales of the Jazz Age. During his lifetime, he published 4 novels, 4 story collections, and 164 short stories. Although he achieved temporary popular success and fortune in the 1920s, Fitzgerald received critical acclaim only after his death and is now widely regarded as one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century that stole everything from his wife. Want to hear a fun fact? Sure. Fitzgerald's father aided Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. Edward Fitzgerald grew up in Rockville, Montgomery County area of Maryland, which, due to its tobacco and slave economy, favored the Confederacy during the Civil War. At the age of 9, Edward rode Confederate spies across the Potomac River. He later helped a member of Mosby's raiders avoid arrest, and he cheered on Jubal Early's army as it drove off Union forces in the Battle of Monterey, just outside of nearby Frederick. Scott's distant connection with Francis Scott Key, writer of the Star-Spangled Banner, is often noted, though his less distant Confederate connection also played a powerful role in shaping his sense of American history. So he was a jerk that stole from his wife, and he comes from a long line of jerks that helped Confederates keep slaves. Well, why don't we head down to the library and read the rest of this book? There you are. Why don't you settle in as I read Chapter 8 to you? I couldn't sleep all night. A foghorn was groaning incessantly on the sound, and I tossed half sick between grotesque reality and savage, frightening dreams. Toward dawn, I heard a taxi go up Gatsby's Drive, and I immediately jumped out of bed and began to dress. I felt that I had something to tell him, something to warn him about, and morning would be too late. Crossing his lawn, I saw that his front door was still open, and he was leaning against a table in the hall, heavy with dejection, or sleep. Nothing happened, he said wanly. I waited, and about, 4 o'clock, she came to the window and stood there for a minute, and then turned out the light. His house had never seemed so enormous to me as it did that night when we hunted through the great rooms for cigarettes. Oh, we pushed aside curtains that were like pavilions and felt over innumerable feet of dark wall or for electric light switches. Once I tumbled with a sort of splash upon the keys of a ghostly piano. Oh, and there was an explicable amount of dust everywhere, and the rooms were musty, as though they hadn't been aired for many days. And I found the humidor on an unfamiliar table with 2 stale, dry cigarettes inside. Throwing open the French windows of the drawing room, we sat smoking out into the darkness. You ought to go away, I said. It's pretty certain they'll trace your car. Go away now, old sport. Go to Atlantic City for a week, or up to Montreal. I couldn't consider it. He couldn't possibly leave Daisy until he knew what she was going to do. He was clutching at some last hope that I couldn't bear to shake him free. It was this night that he told me the strange story of his youth with Dan and Cody. Told it to me because, quote, Jay Gatsby, unquote, had broken up like glass against Tom's hard malice. And the long secret extravaganza is played out, and I think that he would have acknowledged anything now without reserve, but he wanted to talk about Daisy. She was the first nice girl he had ever known. In various unrevealed capacities, he had come in contact with such people, but always with indiscernible barbed wire in between. He found her excitingly desirable. He went to her house, at first with other officers from camp, Tyler, and then alone. It amazed him. He had never been in such a beautiful house before, but what gave it an air of breathless intensity was that Daisy lived there. I was a casual thing to her, as his tent out at camp was to him. There was a ripe mystery about it, a hint of bedrooms upstairs, more beautiful and cool than other bedrooms, of gay and radiant activities taking place through the corridors, and of romances that were not musty and late already in lavender, but fresh and breathing, with redolent. Fresh and breathing and redolent. Whatever, we're moving on. And this year's shining motor cars and of dances whose flowers were scarcely withered. It was exciting to him, too, that many men had already loved Daisy. It increased her value in his eyes. He felt their presence all about the house, pervading the air with the shades and echoes, still vibrant emotions. But he knew that he was at Daisy's house by a colossal accident. However glorious might be his future as Jay Gatsby, he was, at present, a penniless young man without a past, and at any moment the invisible cloak of his uniform might slip from his shoulders. So he made the most of his time and took what he could get, ravenously and unscrupulously. Eventually, he took Daisy one still October night. Took her because he had no real right to touch her hand. He might have despised himself, for he had certainly taken her under false pretenses. And I don't mean that he had traded on his phantom millions, but he had deliberately given Daisy a sense of security. He let her believe that he was a person from much the same stratum as herself, that he was fully able to take care of her. As a matter of fact, he had no such facilities. He had no comfortable family standing behind him. He was liable at the whim of an impersonal government to be blown anywhere about the world. But he didn't despise himself, and it didn't turn out as he had imagined. He had intended, probably, to take what he could get and go. But now he had found that he had committed himself to the following of a grail. He knew that Daisy was extraordinary, but he didn't realize just how extraordinary a nice girl could be. She vanished into her rich house, into her rich full life, leaving Gatsby, nothing. He felt marred to her. Married, not marred. That's the same thing. That was all. When they met again 2 days later, it was Gatsby who was breathless, who was somehow betrayed. Her porch was bright with the broad luxury of a starshine. The wicker of a settee squeaked fashionably as she turned toward him, and he kissed her curious and lovely mouth. She had caught a cold, and it made her voice huskier and more charming than ever. And Gatsby was overwhelmingly aware of the youth and mystery that wealth imprisons and preserves, and the freshness of many clothes, and of Daisy gleaming like silver, safe and proud above hot struggles of poor. I can't believe, to you, how surprised I was to find out I loved her, old sport. I even hoped for a while that she'd throw me over, but she didn't, because she was in love with me, too. Oh, she thought I knew a lot because I knew different things from her, ... space, period. Well, there I was, way off my ambitions, getting deeper in love every minute, and all of a sudden I didn't care. What was the use of doing great things if I could have a better time telling her what I was going to do? On the last afternoon before he went abroad, he sat with Daisy in his arms for a long, silent time. It was a cold fall day, with fire in the room, and her cheeks flushed. Now and then she moved, and she changed his arm a little bit, and it once kissed her dark, shining hair. The afternoon had made them tranquil, I said. That's how I pronounce that. As if to give them a deep memory for the long parting the next day promised. They had never been closer in their month of love, nor communicated more profoundly with one another. Then, when she brushed silent lips against his coat shoulder, or when he touched the end of her fingers gently, as though she were asleep, he did extraordinarily well in the war. He was as a captain before he went to the front, and following the Argonne battles, he got his majority and the command of the divisional machine guns. And after the armistice, he tried frantically to get home, but some complication or misunderstanding sent him to Oxford instead. He was worried now. There was a quality of nervous despair in Daisy's letter. She didn't see why he couldn't come. She was feeling the pressure of the world outside, and she wanted to see him and feel his presence beside her and be reassured that she was doing the right thing after all. For Daisy was young, and her artificial world was redolent of orchids and pleasant, cheerful snobbery and orchestras which set the rhythm of the year, summing up the sadness and the suggestiveness of life in new tunes. All night the saxophones wailed as the hopeless comment of the Beale Street Blues, while 100 pairs of gold and silver slippers shuffled the shining dust. At the great tea hour, there was always rooms that throbbed incessantly with this low, sweet fever, while fresh faces drifted here and there, like rose petals blown by the sad horns around the floor. Though this twilight universe, Daisy began to move again with the season. Suddenly, she was again keeping half a dozen dates a day with half a dozen men, burp and drowsing asleep at dawn with the beads and chiffon of an evening dress tangled among dying orchids on the floor beside her bed. And all the time, something within her was crying for a decision. She wanted her life shaped now, immediately, and the decision must be made by some force. Of love, of money, of unquestionable practicality. That was close at hand. That force took shape in the middle of spring with the arrival of Tom Buchanan. There was a wholesome buskiness about his person and his position, and Daisy was flattered. Doubtless, there was a certain struggle and a certain relief. The letter reached Gatsby while he was still at Oxford. It was dawn now on Long Island, and we went about opening the rest of the windows downstairs, filling the house with the gray-turning, gold-turning light. The shadow of a tree fell abruptly across the dew, and ghostly birds began to sing among the blue leaves. There was a slow, pleasant movement in the air, scarcely a wind, and promising a cool, lovely day. I don't think she ever loved him. Gatsby turned around from a window and looked at me challengingly. You must remember, old sport, that she was very excited this afternoon. He told her those things in a way that frightened her, that made it look as if I was some kind of cheap sharper. And the result was she hardly knew what she was saying. He sat down gloomily. Of course, she might have loved him just for a minute, when they were first married, and loved me even more then. Do you see? Suddenly he came out with a curious remark. Not in any case, he said, it was just personal. What could you make of that, except to suspect some intensity of his conception of the affair that couldn't be measured? He came back from France when Tom and Daisy were still on their wedding trip and made a miserable but irresistible journey to Louisville on the last of his army pay, and he stayed there a week, walking the streets where their footsteps had clicked together through the November night and revisiting the out-of-the-way places to which they had driven in a white car. Just as Daisy's house had always seemed to him more mysterious and gay than other houses, so his idea of the city itself, even though she was gone from it, was pervaded with a melancholy beauty. He left, feeling that if he had searched harder, he might have found her. But that was leaving her behind. The day coach, he was penniless now, was hot. Oh, he went out of the open vestibule and sat down in a folding chair, and the station slid away and the backs of the unfamiliar buildings moved by. Then, out into the spring fields, where a yellow trolley raced them for a minute with people in it who might have once seen the pale magic of her face along the casual street. The track curved now, and it was going away from the sun, which as it sank lower seemed to spread itself in benediction over the vanishing city where she had drawn her breath. He stretched out his hand desperately as if to snatch only a wisp of air, to save a fragment of the spot that she had made lovingly for him. But it was all going by too fast now for his blurred eyes, and he knew that he had lost that part of it, the freshest and the best forever. Well, it was 9 o'clock when we finished breakfast, and we went out to the porch. And the night had made a sharp difference in the weather, and there had been an autumn flavor in the air. The gardener, the last one of Gatsby's former servants, came to the foot of the steps. I'm gonna drain the pool. Today, Mr. Gatsby. Leaves will start falling pretty soon, and there's always trouble with the pipes. I don't do it today, Gatsby answered, and he turned to me apologetically. You know, old sport, I've never used the pool all summer. I looked at my watch and stood up. 12 minutes to my train. I didn't want to go to the city. I wasn't worth a decent stroke of work, but it was more than that. I didn't want to leave Gatsby. I missed that train, and then another before I could get myself away. I'll call you up, I said finally. Do, old sport. I'll call you about noon. We walked slowly down the steps. I suppose Daisy'll call, too. He looked at me anxiously as if he had hoped I'd corroborate this. I suppose so. Well, goodbye. We shook hands, and I started away. But before I reached the hedge, I remembered something and turned around. They're a rotten crowd, I shouted across the lawn. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together. I've always been glad I said that. It was only a compliment I had ever given him because I disapproved of him from the beginning to the end. Then why did he just spend the whole day ignoring trains and hanging out? First he nodded politely, and then his face broke into that radiant and understanding smile, as if we'd been ecstatic cahoots on that fact all the time. His gorgeous pink rag of a suit made a bright spot of color against the white steps. And I thought of the night when I first came to his ancestral home. 3 months before. The lawn and drive had been crowded with the faces of those who guessed at his corruption, and he had stood on those steps, concealing his incorruptible dream as he waved them goodbye. I thanked him for his hospitality, and we were always thanking him for that, I and the others. Goodbye, I called. I enjoyed breakfast, Gatsby. With that, why don't we take a little break where I can, maybe convince you to go upstairs to the master bedroom where I can tell you about the latest in romance literature from Penguin Random House Books. There you are. You finally made it. Welcome to my room where everything is made of red Are you just wearing swim trunks? You're just wearing swim trunks. You come to my love chambers just wearing swim trunks. You got a book. What's the book? Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune. It's women's fiction. It's contemporary romance. Fine. About Meet Me at the Lake? Fine, let's learn about it. The most anticipated book by Today.com, Oprah Daily, BuzzFeed, She Reads, Zibby Mag, Her Campus, The Every Girl, and more. A random connection sends two strangers on a day-long adventure where they make a promise, one keeps and the other breaks, with life-changing effects in this breathtaking new novel from the New York Times. Everyone's a New York Times best-selling author. This one, at least, Oprah's heard of this author, and BuzzFeed's heard of this author. I don't know what the heck Zibby Mag is, but, it's just another person that's a New York Times best-selling author. I could be one. Apparently, you just got to pay a couple $1,000, and then they put you on the list. Of Every Summer After, Fern Brookbanks was wasted far too much of her adult life thinking about Will Baxter. She spent just 24 hours in her early 20s with the aggravatingly attractive, idealistic artist, a chance encounter that spiraled into day-long adventure in the city. Oh, the timing was wrong, but their connection was undeniable. They shared every secret, every dream, and made a pact to meet 1 year later. Fern showed up. Will didn't. At 32, Fern's life doesn't look at all like she once imagined it would. Instead of living in the city, Fern's back home, running her mother's lakeside resort, something she vowed never to do. The place was in disarray, and her ex-boyfriend, the manager, and Fern didn't know where to begin. Fern didn't know where to begin. Oh, she lives a lifeline. To her surprise, it comes in the form of Will, who arrives 9 years too late, with a suitcase in tow and an offer to help on his lips. Will may be the only person who understands what Fern's going through, but how could she possibly trust the expensive suit-wearing Mirage, who seems nothing like the young man she met all those years ago? Will is hiding something, and Fern's not sure she wants to know what it is. But 10 years ago, Will Baxter rescued Fern, and can she do the same for him? Well, that's, Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune, paperback and hardcover. It's $28, coming out May 2nd, 2023. It's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Bookshop.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's, Target, and Walmart. Well, with that, I'm not in the mood anymore, so why don't we go back down to the library and finish this book, and then you can go the hell home. There, you're still wearing those swim trunks. For the love of God, you're in a mansion. Dress appropriately. You're just sitting there in your swim trunks, getting your suntan lotion all over that leather Naga hide chair. Up in the city, I tried for a while to list the quotations on an intermittent amount of stock, until then I fell asleep in my swivel chair. Just before noon, the phone woke me, and I started with a sweat breaking out of my forehead. It was Jordan Baker. She often called me up at this hour because of the uncertainty of her own movements between hotels and clubs and private houses. That made her hard to find in any other way. Usually her voice came over the wire as something fresh and cool, as if a divot from a green golf links had come sailing in at the office window. But this morning seemed harsh and dry. "I've left Daisy's house," she said. "I'm at Hampstead. And I'm going down to Southampton this afternoon." Probably it had been tactful to leave Daisy's house, but the act annoyed me, and her next remark made me rigid. "You weren't so nice to me last night." "How could it have mattered then?" Silence for a moment, then, "However, I want to see you." "I want to see you too." "Suppose I don't go to Southampton and come into town this afternoon?" "No, I don't think this afternoon." "Very well. It's impossible this afternoon. And we talked like that for a while. And then abruptly, we weren't talking any longer, and I don't know which was hung up with a sharp click, but I know I didn't care. I couldn't have talked to her across the tea table that day if I never talked to her again in this world. I called Gatsby's house a few minutes later. I thought he didn't like him. But then the line was busy. I tried 4 times, and finally an exasperated central told me the wire had been kept open for a long distance from Detroit. Talking about a timetable, I drew a small circle around the 3:30 train, and then I leaned back in my chair and tried to think. It was just noon. When I passed the ash heaps on the train that morning, I had crossed deliberately to the other side of the car, and I suppose there'd be a curious crowd around there all day with little boys, search for dark spots in the dust, and then some gargarous man burp, telling over and over what had happened until it became less and less real even to him, and then he could tell it no longer, and Myrtle Wilson's traffic achievement was forgotten. Now I want to go back to a little and tell what happened at the garage after we left there that night before. They had difficulty in locating the sister, Catherine. She must have broken her rule against drinking that night, for when she arrived she was stupid with liquor, and unable to understand that the ambulance had already gone into Flushing, and when they convinced her of this, she immediately fainted, as if that was a tolerable part of the affair. For someone, kind, curious, took her in his car and drove her into the wake of her sister's body. Until long after midnight, a changing crowd lapped up against the front of the garage while George Wilson rocked himself back and forth on the couch inside. For a while, the door of the office was open, and everyone who came into the garage glanced irresistibly through it. Finally, someone said it was a shame, and closed the door. Michaelis, and several other men were with him. First, 4 or 5 men. Later, 2 or 3 men. And still, Michaelis had to ask the little stranger to wait there 15 minutes later. And while he went back to his own place, he made a pot of coffee. After that, he stayed there alone with Wilson until dawn. About 3 o'clock, the quality of Wilson's incoherent muttering changed. He grew quieter, and he began to talk about the yellow car. He announced that he had a way of finding out whom the yellow car belonged to, and then he blurted out that a couple of months ago his wife had come from the city with her face bruised and her nose swollen. But when he heard himself say this, he flinched and began to cry. Oh my God! Again, in his groaning voice. Michaelis made a clumsy attempt to distract him. How long have you been married, George? Come on there, try to sit still a minute and answer my question. How long have you been married? 12 years. Ever have any children? Come on, George, sit still. I asked you a question. Did you ever have any children? The hard brown beetles kept thudding against the dull light. Whatever Michaelis, I'm just going to say his name in all sorts of weird ways for the rest of this book, heard the car go tearing along the road outside and sounded to him like the car that had stopped a few hours before, and he didn't like to go into the garage because the workbench was stained where the body had been lying. So he moved uncomfortably around the office, and he knew every object in it before morning, and from time to time sat down beside Wilson, trying to keep him more quiet. Have you got a church you can go to sometimes, George? Maybe even if you haven't been there for a long time. Maybe I could call up the church and get a priest to come over and he could talk to you, see? Don't belong to any. You ought to have a church, George, for times like this. You must have gone to church once. Didn't you get married in a church? Listen, George, listen to me. Didn't you get married in a church? That was a long time ago. The effort of answering broke the rhythm of his rocking. For a moment, he was silent. Then the same half-knowing, half-bewildered look came back into his faded eyes. Look at the drawer there, he said, pointing at the desk. Which drawer? That drawer, that one. Michaelis opened the drawer nearest his hand. There was nothing in it but a small, expensive dog leash made of leather and braided silver, and it was apparently new. This, he inquired, holding it up. Wilson stared and nodded. I found it yesterday afternoon. She tried to tell me about it, but I knew it was something funny. You mean your wife bought it? She had it wrapped in tissue paper on the bureau. She bought a dog. She bought a whole dog. Where'd the dog go? Would she release it into the street afterwards? Is the dog homeless now? Michaelis didn't see anything on that, and he gave Wilson a dozen reasons why his wife might have bought a dog leash, but conceivably Wilson had heard some of these same explanations before from Myrtle, because he began saying, "Oh my God," again in a whisper. His comforter left several explanations in the air. Then he killed her, said Wilson, his mouth dropped open suddenly. Who did? I have a way of finding out. You morbid George, said his friend. This has been a stain to you, and you won't know what you're saying. You better try and sit still and quiet till morning. He murdered her. It's an accident, George. Wilson shook his head, his eyes narrowed, and his mouth widened slightly with the ghost of a superior. I know, he said definitely. I'm one of these trusting fellas, and I don't think any harm to nobody. But when I get to know a thing, I know it. It was the man in that car. She ran out to speak to him, and he wouldn't stop. Michaelis had seen this too, but it hadn't occurred to him that there was any special significance in it. He believed that Mrs. Wilson had been running away from her husband rather than trying to stop any particular car. How could she have been like that? She's a deep one, said Wilson, as if that answered the question. He began to rock again, and Michaelis stood twisting with the leash in his hand. Maybe you got some friend that I could telephone for, George? That was a forlorn hope. He was almost sure that Wilson had no friend. there was not enough of him for his wife, and he was glad a little later that he noticed a change in the room, a blue quickening by the window, and realized that dawn wasn't far off. About 5 o'clock, it was blue enough outside to snap off the light. Wilson's glazed eyes turned out to the ash heaps, where small gray clouds took on fantastic shapes and scurried here and there in the faint dawn wind. "I spoke to her," he muttered after a long silence. "Burp. I told her she might fool me, but she can't fool God. I took her to the window." And with an effort he got up and walked to the rear window and leaned with his face pressed against it. And I said, God knows what you've been doing, everything you've been doing. You may fool me, but you can't fool God. Standing behind him, Michaelis saw that a shock that he was looking at the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, which had just emerged pale and enormous from the dissolving night. "God sees everything," repeated Wilson. That's an advertisement," Michael assured him. Something made him turn away from the window and look back into the room, but Wilson stood there a long time, his face close to the window pane, nodding into the twilight. By 6 o'clock, McAllis was worn out and grateful for the sound of a car stopping outside, and it was one of the watchers of the night before who had promised to come back, so he cooked breakfast for 3, which he was the other man ate together, and Wilson was quieter now as Michaelis went home to sleep. When he awoke 4 hours later and hurried back to the garage, Wilson was gone. His movements, he was on foot all the time, were afterward traced by Port Roosevelt, and then to Gad's Hill, where he bought a sandwich that he didn't eat, and a cup of coffee. Oh, he must have been tired and walking slowly, for he didn't reach Gad's Hill until noon. Thus far, there's no difficulty in accounting for this time. There were boys who had seen a man, quote, acting sort of crazy, unquote, and motorists whom he stared oddly from the side of the road. And then for 3 hours, he disappeared from view. The police, on the strength of what he said to McAllis, that he had a way of finding out. Suppose that he spent time going from garage to garage thereabout, inquiring for a yellow car. And on the other hand, no garage man who had seen him ever came forward, and perhaps he had an easier, surer way of finding out what he wanted to know. And by 2:30, he was in West Egg, where he asked someone the way to Gatsby's house. So by that time, he knew Gatsby's name. At 2 o'clock, Gatsby put on his bathing suit and left word with the butler that if anyone phoned, it was to be brought to him at the pool. He stopped at the garage for a pneumatic mattress that he amused his guests during the summer, and a chauffeur helped him pump it up. Then he gave instructions that the open car wasn't to be taken out under any circumstances. And this was strange, because the front right fender needed repair. Gatsby shouldered the mattresses and started for the pool. Once he stopped and shifted it a little, and the chauffeur asked him if he needed help, but he shook his head and in a moment disappeared among the yellowing trees. No telephone message arrived, but when the butler went out with his sleep and waited until about 4 o'clock, until long after, there was only one to give it if it came. I have an idea that if Gatsby himself didn't believe it would come, and then perhaps he no longer cared, if that was true, I must have felt that he had lost the old warm world, paid a high price for living too long with a single dream. He must have looked up at an unfamiliar sky through fast... Are you okay?
Sorry.
Through frightening leaves and shivered as he found what a grotesque thing a rose is and how raw the sunlight was upon the scarcely created grass. A new world, material without being real, where poor ghosts, breathing dreams like air, drifted fortuitously about. Like that ashen, fantastic figure gliding toward him through the amorphous trees, the chauffeur, he was one of Wolfshine's protégés, heard the shots. Afterward, he could only say that he hadn't thought anything much about them, and I drove them to the station directly to Gatsby's house, and my rushing anxiety up the front steps was the first thing that alarmed anyone. But they knew then, I firmly believe, with scarcely a word said, 4 of us, the chauffeur, butler, the gardener, and I hurried down to the pool. There was a faint, barely perceptible movement of the water as the fresh flow from one end urged its way toward the drain at the other. With little ripples, that were hardly the shadows of waves. The laden mattress moved regularly down the pool. A small gust of wind that scarcely corrugated the surface was enough to disturb its accidental course with its accidental burden. The touch of a cluster of leaves revolved it slowly, tracing, like the leg of a compass, a thin red circle in the water. It was after we started with Gatsby toward the house that the gardener saw Wilson's body a little way off in the grass, and the Holocaust was complete. Well, with that, why don't we retire down to the smoking room, where perhaps you can enjoy a cigarette as we review what the hell we just read. Well, there you are. Sitting yourself down, still wearing swim trunks. Why are they wet? What did you do between the upstairs and here that you're wearing wet swim trunks now? All right, let's recap what the hell we just read. Nick can't sleep, so he goes to see Gatsby because he's obsessed with them. Gatsby talks about Dan Cody. Gatsby talks about falling for Daisy's beauty. Gatsby talks about falling for her way of living. Gatsby and Daisy kept their relationship during the way he once took her, because he had made sex with her one cold October. Daisy got all weird about what to do with her life, so then Tom Buchanan swooped in and scooped her up, and she decided to just do that. Later on, the pool guy wants to drain the pool because fall is coming. Gatsby tells him don't do it. He wants to take one more swim, just making it harder on this guy who just wants to do his goddamn job. Nick says he's worth more than all the people at his party put together. Quote, it was the only compliment I ever gave him because I disapproved of him from beginning to end, even though he won't get on the train and go to work because he keeps hanging out with Gatsby. He's hanging out with Gatsby in the middle of the night. He even says when Jordan calls him that, boy, he wishes he was talking to Gatsby. But apparently now he's decided that he doesn't like him. Nick is unproductive at work and gets interrupted by Jordan, who's being a selfish turd. And they argue, and Nick realizes that he doesn't have feelings for her anymore. Meanwhile, back at Wilson's garage, Michaelis, I don't care, comforts Wilson. During the quote-unquote comforting, Wilson says he saw his wife come back from New York with a bruise on her face, and that he found a dog leash in a drawer, where I ask, where the hell's the goddamn dog? He figured that she's cheating on him, and he thinks that the driver of the car that killed her is the one she was cheating with. And as he tells the story, Wilson keeps looking at the I billboard. Wilson searched for the yellow car and fell on Gatsby. And Nick hears gunshots at Gatsby's pool, and he finds Gatsby and carries him into the house. And then he sees Wilson's body nearby. What's good? Turns out Nick might be gay. My daughter found out I was reading this book, and they said, you know he's probably gay, right? And I said, you just like to watch TV and read books and make everyone gay. And she said, no, this time I think he's actually gay. And so she looked it up. So I'm going to go into it in depth on the next episode. Nick might be gay. What sucks? I don't know. The people in this story suck. The story's actually getting good towards the end, so I can't complain as much as I normally do. But I think now Nick kind of sucks, because Nick is suddenly acting like he's better than everyone else after witnessing a murder and a beating. He's decided, I don't like these guys, well, even though he clearly still likes these guys. So what did we learn? Nick saying that Jay Gatsby breaking like a glass against Tom's hard malice is pretty obvious. Gatsby is falling apart when Tom gets involved, and Tom, unfortunately, though he is through the power of him being racist and physically abusive asshole, actually has more of a command over the situation through manipulation and intimidation than Gatsby does with all his money and popularity. Gatsby saying that he quote-unquote took Daisy is probably true, though it could also be a lie, with him believing in a fantasy that he's creating for himself about the relationship to keep him chasing after her against all the odds. But he probably did. Nick gives Gatsby the compliment, and then he tries to imply he's never really liked him, which I don't think is true. He would start out feeling morally superior to him, all the people that attend the parties, but eventually he gets sucked into it, and he's fascinated by Gatsby. And I'm not sure where or why he becomes so defensive, especially since he keeps claiming that he's always impartial and tries to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And I understand he's disillusioned by all the cheating and the selfishness, but until now, he seemed okay with it. He's either an unreliable narrator or he's never been honest about his morals, and he only fantasizes about himself, just like Gatsby. The over-the-shoulder style of narration when it comes to McCallus puts Nick at a distance from Wilson, which is interesting, and in a position of a watchful billboard, like the watchful billboard. He's taking the role of the watchful. I think you're catching on now. Which, interestingly enough, Wilson keeps looking toward in his darkest moment. And there's a repetition of the mysterious phone calls, which they're supposed to be so important. And there's the murder-suicide of Gatsby and Wilson, which can be seen as a consequence of the Buchanan's actions, though they are probably won't realize it being anything more than kind of like a weird or regrettable occurrence that's probably going to keep happening throughout their lives, because they're rich and they're jerks. The theme here is probably that the excesses of the wealthy living the American dream draws in common people like Nick or Gatsby, who can get close but can never be fully included, resulting in their eventual destruction, or at least disillusionment, with the quote-unquote dream. Gatsby being destroyed by it, and Nick being disgusted to the point where he will leave. It's the next chapter. It's kind of a spoiler, I guess, if you have no idea, have never heard of this book before, and cuts emotional ties with Jordan. Oh, thank God. Well, the clock's going off, which means it's late, and you need to go the hell home. And why don't you stay home? I think you can probably live the rest of your life not having read the last chapter of The Great Gatsby. You got 99.9% of the story. You'll be fine. But I'm sure I'll see you next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, there's that. Are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people. Not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com, which basically just points you to Mastodon. Why did I go all in with Mastodon? I have no idea. But if you go there, it'll point you to my link tree where you can listen to episodes, which is confusing and meticulous. But if you want to go to just my link tree, which is linktr.ee/Nuzzlehouse, it'll point you to all the rest of my shows, like Glenn reads books to you, which you're listening to right now, Gestating the Curious Mind, where my wife and I write paranormal smut and then publish it on Amazon, and also Nuzzlehouse's CBS Radio Mystery Theater, where we basically create our own episodes of Radio Mystery Theater, a show from the 70s, because they don't make them anymore. Damn it, we want to hear something new. Oh, I'm also on Instagram, something that I try to use but dislike, which is Instagram.com/HouseNuzzle. And the lesser now, thanks to Elon Musk, Twitter. Used to be my home, and now I can't stand it, which is Twitter.com/HouseNuzzle. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly, glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdling or a dork. Now, back to business. Can't believe I drank all of them already. There's gotta be one left.